Canadians are expressing their anger with the Trump administration's tariffs.
Trump's pulling his moves? Absolutely, positively not. I just hope that the Canadian government bully him right back, because that's all he's doing.
Would this help if I back up? All the Canadian products are at eye level now. That didn't used to be. You want to know where the American products are?
Something unprecedented is happening across Canada. More than 50% of Canadians are now actively boycotting American-made products. This isn't a small protest or a trending hashtag, it's a full-scale consumer rebellion. According to a new nationwide survey reported by Supermarket News, 71% of Canadian shoppers say they plan to buy fewer U.S. groceries this year, and a staggering 84% cite U.S. tariffs as the reason. You can feel it in grocery stores, airports, fast food counters, even online. American brands once dominant are being quietly pushed aside, not because they're lower quality, not because they're more expensive, but because they now symbolize something else, a neighbor that's gone too far. This movement isn't being led by politicians, it's being driven by regular Canadians, families, students, retirees, who are making small but deliberate choices every day with every dollar. And together, those choices are forming one of the most coordinated economic responses the U.S. has ever faced from its closest ally. Across the country from Vancouver to Halifax, this isn't about ideology, it's about respect. And to many Canadians, Washington just crossed a line.
For the first time in 18 years, SCM maintenance workers have walked off the job, grinding Montreal metros and buses to a halt. So how did we get here?
The backlash isn't symbolic, it's showing up in everyday life. In Quebec, where the backlash was strongest,
on the top shelf, Alan hides the labels of American-made bottles.
Tennessee.
US-made alcohol vanished from shelves almost overnight. Consumers didn't complain, they adapted. Canadian distilleries saw a sudden surge in sales, filling the gap with local brands that became more than just substitutes, they became statements. In grocery stores across Canada, the change is even more visible. Chains like Sobeys and Metro are now tagging Canadian products more prominently, while U.S. imports once standard are getting pushed to the side. It's not just marketing, it's consumer demand.
The looming threat of U.S. President Donald Trump's tariffs, a buy-Canadian movement, has picked up across the country.
People aren't waiting for trade deals or diplomatic resets, they're voting with their wallets. The boycott has also gone digital. In Quebec, about 36% of residents have either canceled or plan to cancel US-based streaming services like Netflix and Disney+. It's not just about money, it's about content culture and principle. Social media campaigns are urging Canadians to unsubscribe for sovereignty, and many are listening. Even major platforms are starting to notice the churn, with analysts warning of regional erosion in North American markets. And perhaps most striking of all, Canadian travel to the US dropped by nearly 40% in May compared to the same period in 2024. That's not seasonal, that's a boycott. Flights to Florida, California, and New York, typically prime vacation spots, are being canceled or left unbooked. Travel agencies are repackaging itineraries to keep tourists within Canadian borders, while billboard campaigns near Toronto's Pearson Airport read "Spend here, not there." Each of these actions alone might seem minor.
Starting today, LCBO, the largest purchaser of alcohol in the world, will begin removing U.S. products from its store shelves.
Together, they signal a fundamental shift in how Canadians engage with the U.S. economy. And the longer the tariffs stay, the deeper these consumer habits will harden. This wasn't some viral moment or a temporary spike in outrage. It began with a pen stroke in Washington, and it's unraveling decades of economic integration. In March 2025, President Donald Trump imposed sweeping new tariffs, 25% on Canadian steel and aluminum, and a flat 10% on nearly all other Canadian exports. The announcement came with no warning, no transition period, and no exemptions. It was a hard reset of U.S.-Canada trade relations introduced without negotiation and framed as economic self-defense. Canada's response was swift and just as forceful. Within days, Ottawa hit back with 25% retaliatory tariffs on more than $155 billion worth of U.S. goods, from agricultural produce to manufactured goods, consumer electronics to packaged food. Trade experts called it the largest tariff retaliation in Canadian history. But what happened next was even more unprecedented. The Canadian public didn't wait for politicians to act further, they acted themselves. From Vancouver to Halifax, consumers began turning their wallets into weapons. Without any coordinated campaign, they launched a decentralized boycott. Buying U.S. products became taboo. American-made goods were pulled from grocery carts, unsubscribed from streaming platforms, avoided at gas stations and skipped in restaurant lines. Not because of quality, not even because of price, but because of what those products now represented: disrespect, imbalance, and economic aggression. And the numbers back it up. According to YouGov and Supermarket News, polling, over 50% of Canadians are actively boycotting American-made products, while 71% say they'll buy fewer U.S. groceries this year, and 84% cite American tariffs as the primary reason. This isn't a symbolic protest. It's a behavioral shift that touches every category of daily life. Even more striking, this movement is unified across provinces' age groups and political ideology. Quebec and Alberta Liberals and Conservatives, Gen Z and Boomers, they've all found common ground in one act: rejecting U.S. imports. And for many, this isn't just retaliation, it's awakening. Because for years, Canada has quietly accepted its economic dependence on the United States. But now, after being blindsided by tariffs, consumers are asking a deeper question: why buy American if it means giving up control? In short, the boycott is no longer just about Trump's trade policy. It's about a broader reckoning with supply chain sovereignty and the silent imbalance that's defined U.S.-Canada commerce for decades.
I think Americans are very siloed. They think that the world surrounds them.
And this time, it's not government policy driving change. It's people. What began as a tariff announcement in Washington has transformed into a grassroots uprising in Canadian households, boardrooms, airports, and grocery aisles. This isn't just a trade dispute anymore. It's a cultural shift visible in every corner of Canadian life. The timeline below traces how a political decision became a consumer revolution.
Yes, I'm not buying anything American anymore.
Yes.
I stopped about 2 weeks ago.
June 2025, the tipping point. By the first week of June, Canadian consumer behavior had decisively changed. More than 50% of Canadians reported actively boycotting U.S.-made products, according to multiple national surveys. But this wasn't just a quiet preference shift, it was a visible rejection. Streaming cancellations hit hard in Quebec, where over a third of users ditched U.S. services, turning digital habits into political statements. Meanwhile, Canadian tourism operators confirmed a 38 to 40% drop in bookings to U.S. destinations, with destinations like Florida and California bearing the brunt. This wasn't fear or cost-driven, it was protest. Airports reported sharp declines in outbound U.S. travel, while domestic tourism surged under the push of new spend here not there rebate programs. At the same time, local businesses from bookstores to breweries began rolling out 100% Canadian campaigns, capitalizing on the moment, but also responding to genuine demand. In short, this wasn't symbolic, it was systemic. May 2025, market response retailers moved fast. Faced with rising consumer pressure, major grocery chains such as Sobeys Metro and Loblaws began relabeling shelves, introducing proudly Canadian markers, and quietly moving U.S. products out of featured placement. Surveys showed 71% of shoppers actively avoided U.S. groceries, even if domestic alternatives were more expensive. Retailers didn't need government orders. Consumer behavior was clear. Industry analysts warned that U.S. food and beverage companies were already seeing reduced shelf presence and lower sales volumes, particularly in provinces like Ontario and British Columbia. This wasn't a boycott that needed picket signs, it moved through everyday purchases. March 2025, the shockwave. This was the month it went public and personal. In a headline-making decision, Quebec banned all U.S.-produced alcohol from its government-run liquor stores. Within days, shelves that once carried Jack Daniel's and Jim Beam were cleared and replaced with Canadian-made whiskey, vodka, and rum. Liquor distributors called the move sudden, but the public response was overwhelmingly supportive. That same month, Canadian cross-border travel to the U.S. dropped nearly 40% year over year as travelers opted to stay domestic or choose alternative international destinations. Hashtags like #No Tariffs, No Trips began trending, and travel agencies reported a spike in cancellations for U.S.-bound vacation. Even fast food chains began to feel the pressure. Consumer foot traffic at U.S. restaurant brands declined, while domestic names like Tim Hortons capitalized on the moment with marketing that emphasized their Canadian roots. February 2025, the quiet shift. Well before headlines screamed boycott, Canadians had already begun changing habits. A survey conducted in February showed 98% of Canadians were checking labels for Made in Canada when shopping for daily essentials. These early moves didn't make international news, but they laid the foundation. Social media was flooded with user-generated tips for identifying U.S. products to avoid. Facebook groups and Reddit threads grew around the theme of economic independence. Grocery apps began tagging items with national origin data, and shoppers used that information. Quietly, the economic rebellion had begun not from Parliament, but from pantries. As the public movement gained traction, Canadian leadership adjusted its tone. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and several provincial premiers, including Quebec and British Columbia, publicly embraced the Buy Canadian movement, linking it to economic resilience and national pride. Trade ministers began drafting new consumer protection rules to ensure transparent product labeling, while some MPs called for audits of government contracts that benefited US-based firms. It became clear this wasn't just a temporary protest, it was a shift in how Canada thought about trade supply chains and self-reliance. From February to June 2025, a quiet sentiment turned into a loud signal. The Canadian boycott of American products was not organized by the state. It was led by consumers reacting faster and more decisively than anyone expected. One tariff led to another, but what caught everyone off guard was this: it wasn't Ottawa that delivered the biggest blow to U.S. goods. It was everyday Canadians using their wallets. And now the shift is baked in. The Canadian boycott of American products has evolved from scattered frustration into a full-scale coordinated movement, one that now defines the national mood. What began as a reaction to U.S. tariffs has become a rare moment of political and social unity across Canada, with a growing number of citizens, companies, and political leaders aligning around one goal: reducing economic dependence on the United States. Recent national polling shows that 61% of Canadians across all political affiliations are now actively boycotting American-made goods. This is not a partisan reaction. From liberal-leaning cities like Vancouver and Toronto to conservative heartlands in Alberta, Canadians from across the spectrum are making the same choice, shifting their purchasing power toward domestic alternatives. It is perhaps the first time in years that a single economic issue has unified such a diverse population. Commentators have called this moment unprecedented, describing it as the most unified public movement in recent memory. Fueling this movement is technology. Apps like MapleScan and OScan Canada are helping consumers instantly detect whether a product is made in or distributed from the U.S. With barcode scanning country of origin filters and real-time tariff warnings, these platforms have surged in popularity. In the past 2 months, they've become some of the most downloaded tools in the Canadian app ecosystem, especially among Gen Z and millennial users. The impact is tangible. Local retailers have begun partnering with these apps to flag Canadian products more clearly on shelves, while some have restructured inventory based on user scanning data. American corporations are beginning to respond not because of government pressure, but because Canadian consumers are voting with their wallets. Food and beverage conglomerates have warned shareholders of sharp sales declines in the Canadian market, particularly in categories like liquor, snacks, and frozen goods. Amazon Canada has quietly shifted its recommendation algorithms to favor domestic sellers and now highlights local supply chains more aggressively. Meanwhile, U.S. airlines facing a drop in Canada-bound passengers have begun lobbying Ottawa and Washington for tariff relief, citing serious financial risks if current consumer trends continue. This is not a temporary protest. It is a structural shift. As Canada reorients its economic behavior from the bottom up, what once looked like a fringe reaction is now shaping corporate strategy, retail policy, and trade negotiations alike. Canada isn't backing down, it's standing up. What the world is witnessing in 2025 is not an economic collapse, but an awakening. The backlash to U.S. tariffs hasn't come from diplomats or trade ministers. It's come from everyday Canadians quietly but forcefully redrawing the lines of economic loyalty. The result isn't chaos, it's clarity. Consumers have realized the most powerful sanction isn't written in legislation, it's made at the checkout counter. While Washington debates trade imbalances and tariff charts, Canadian shoppers have already taken action. They're shifting habits, canceling subscriptions, avoiding imports, and rerouting their vacations. And their message couldn't be clearer. Respect goes both ways. What began as a tariff spat has evolved into a national assertion of dignity control and long overdue independence. This isn't just a boycott, it's a reckoning. Comment below we're building the country's own story of resistance. Like the video so this movement reaches others. Subscribe now because this isn't a controversy. It's a consumer uprising you'll want to follow.